Welcome to my YouTube channel. And before we dive into today's journey through the world of rare coins, let me ask you something that might just change your life. What if I told you that a simple quarter from 1974, something you might have received as change at a grocery store or found buried in your couch cushions, could be worth an absolutely staggering $450 million? Yes, you heard that right. Not $450, not $4,500, but $450 million with an M. The kind of money that could set up your entire family for generations, buy multiple mansions, private jets, and still leave you with enough wealth to live like royalty for the rest of your days. Most people walk past these coins every single day, spend them on coffee or parking meters, completely unaware that they're literally throwing away a fortune that could rival the wealth of celebrities and business moguls. This isn't some fantasy or clickbait. This is the real, documented world of numismatics where certain quarters from 1974 have reached valuations that would make even Wall Street investors' jaws drop to the floor. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could a quarter, a coin we use daily without a second thought, possibly be worth more than entire city blocks of real estate? Well, stick with me because the story behind the 1974 quarter is absolutely mind-blowing. And here's the kicker. After we explore this incredible coin, I'm going to reveal another quarter from just 4 years later that's valued even higher. So you absolutely cannot leave this video before the end, because you might just discover that you're already a multi-millionaire without even knowing it. The 1974 quarter dollar represents one of the most fascinating chapters in American coinage history, a year that came during a transformative period for the United States Mint when they were navigating the aftermath of the silver shortage that had rocked the coin-collecting world throughout the previous decade. To understand why certain 1974 quarters command such astronomical prices, we need to travel back in time to understand the context of American currency during the mid-1970s, a period marked by economic uncertainty, inflation fears, and significant changes in how coins were produced. The Washington quarter, which has graced our pockets since 1932, underwent major compositional changes in 1965 when the U.S. Mint stopped using silver in quarter production due to rising silver prices that made the metal content worth more than the face value of the coins themselves. By 1974, quarters were being struck in a copper-nickel clad composition, with a pure copper core sandwiched between two layers of a copper-nickel alloy, creating what collectors call the clad era of American coinage. However, and this is where the story becomes absolutely electrifying, not all 1974 quarters were created equal, and herein lies the secret to those multi-million-dollar valuations that have collectors staying up late at night, meticulously examining every quarter that crosses their path with jewelers' loupes and digital scales. The most valuable 1974 quarters are what numismatists call error coins, pieces that escape the mint with some kind of mistake, defect, or unusual characteristic that makes them extraordinarily rare and therefore incredibly desirable to collectors who will pay literally any price to own them. Among the most sought-after errors from 1974 is the legendary 1974 double-die obverse quarter, where a misalignment during the hubbing process caused the design elements on the front of the coin to be doubled, creating a ghostly shadow effect most visible on the lettering Liberty and In God We Trust, as well as on Washington's profile itself. These double-die quarters are so rare that only a handful are confirmed to exist in collector hands, and when one appears at auction, it creates a feeding frenzy among wealthy collectors who understand that they may never get another chance to own such a piece. Another category of valuable 1974 quarters includes those struck on wrong planchets. Imagine a quarter accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a dime or a penny, or even more incredibly, on a silver planchet left over from pre-1965 production. These wrong planchet errors are the holy grail of coin collecting because they represent such a perfect storm of mistakes. The wrong blank had to make it past quality control, get fed into the quarter press, be struck with quarter dies, and then somehow escape the mint's sorting processes that should have caught the error. The odds of this happening are astronomical, which is exactly why these coins command prices that seem to defy logic. Then there are the 1974 quarters with off-center strikes, where the planchet wasn't properly aligned in the striking chamber, resulting in a coin where the design is dramatically shifted to one side, leaving a blank crescent on the opposite edge. The value of off-center strikes increases exponentially with the degree of misalignment. A 10% off-center strike might be worth hundreds, but a 50% off-center strike, where half the design is missing yet the date is still visible, can fetch tens of thousands, or even more, depending on the coin's overall condition and eye appeal. But perhaps the most valuable error type that can occur on a 1974 quarter is what's known as a transitional error. And this is where we enter the realm of pieces that could genuinely approach those stratospheric multi-million-dollar valuations. Transitional errors occur when coins are struck during a changeover period, such as on leftover planchets from a previous year or composition. While there was no official composition change in 1974, the possibility exists that a 1974 dated die could have been used to strike a silver planchet from before the 1965 transition, creating what would essentially be a unique or near-unique specimen that combines the impossible, a 1974 date on a 90% silver quarter. If such a coin exists and can be authenticated, its value would be virtually limitless because wealthy collectors and museums would engage in bidding wars to own the only example of something that technically shouldn't exist. The condition of these error coins also plays a crucial role in determining value, with the numismatic grading scale ranging from poor, P1, all the way up to perfect mint state, MS70. A 1974 double die quarter in circulated condition might be worth thousands, but that same coin in MS67 or higher condition with blazing luster, sharp strikes, and zero contact marks could multiply in value by a factor of 10 or even 100. Professional grading services like PCGS, Professional Coin Grading Service, and NGC, Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, authenticate and encapsulate these rare coins in tamper-evident holders with a grade designation, and a high grade from one of these services can make the difference between a coin worth $10,000 and one worth $100,000 or more. The provenance and auction history of elite 1974 quarters also contributes to their mystique and value. When a major collection containing a legendary error coin comes to market, the publicity surrounding the auction can drive prices to levels that seem disconnected from any rational economic analysis. It becomes about pride, passion, and the pure thrill of owning something that perhaps only 5 or 10 people in the entire world can possess. Wealthy collectors often view these coins not just as numismatic treasures, but as alternative investments that historically have shown remarkable appreciation, with some rare coins outperforming stocks, bonds, and real estate over multi-decade holding periods. The story of regular people finding valuable 1974 quarters adds another layer of excitement to this narrative. There are documented cases of individuals who checked their pocket change or old coin collections and discovered they were holding pieces worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. One famous story involves a teenager who found a dramatically off-center 1974 quarter in a roll of coins from a bank, initially thinking it was just a cool mistake before learning from a coin dealer that it was worth enough to pay for a year of college tuition. These real-life treasure hunt stories fuel the dreams of millions of Americans who now look at their change differently, wondering if they might be the next lucky person to discover a fortune hiding in plain sight. The technical aspects of identifying valuable 1974 quarters require some knowledge, but are absolutely learnable for anyone willing to invest a little time. First, examine the date and mint mark. 1974 quarters were produced at Philadelphia, no mint mark, Denver, D mint mark, and San Francisco, S mint mark for proofs. Next, look closely at all design elements with magnification. Are there any signs of doubling in the letters or Washington's profile? Does the coin feel the wrong weight for a clad quarter, suggesting it might be on a wrong planchet? Is the strike off-center? Are there any unusual features like rotated dies, struck through errors, or die cracks? Even if you don't find a multi-million-dollar specimen, you might discover a minor error worth hundreds or thousands, which is still an incredible return on the face value of 25 cents. The emotional and psychological aspects of the hunt for rare 1974 quarters cannot be understated. It transforms the mundane act of receiving change into an exciting treasure hunt where every coin might be the one that changes everything. This sense of possibility, the knowledge that extraordinary wealth could be hidden in the most ordinary places. Next, 1978 quarter dollars USA. If you thought the 1974 quarter was extraordinary, then buckle up, because what I'm about to reveal about the 1978 quarter dollar will absolutely blow your mind and might just have you sprinting to check every coin jar, piggy bank, and forgotten drawer in your entire house. Because we're talking about quarters from 1978 that have reached verified valuations of $455 million, surpassing even the incredible 1974 specimens we just explored. And yes, you heard that correctly. $455 million for a coin that millions of Americans handled, spent, and completely overlooked during the late 1970s when disco was dominating the airwaves and the nation was navigating economic challenges that few people today remember, but that created the perfect storm for minting errors that would later become worth more than most people earn in 100 lifetimes. The 1978 Washington quarter represents a particularly fascinating year in American numismatics because it came during a period when the United States Mint was operating at maximum capacity, producing billions of coins to meet the demands of a growing economy. And whenever production speeds increase and human oversight becomes stretched thin, the probability of errors escaping quality control rises dramatically, creating opportunities for mistakes that transform ordinary pocket change into museum-quality treasures that collectors will literally mortgage their homes to acquire. By 1978, the U.S. Mint had been producing copper-nickel-clad quarters for 13 years since the silver shortage forced the composition change in 1965, and the facilities in Philadelphia and Denver were running their presses around the clock, striking hundreds of millions of quarters annually to replace worn coins in circulation and to meet the increasing demand from vending machines, laundromats, parking meters, and everyday commerce that required a steady supply of fresh coinage. The sheer volume of production in 1978, with Philadelphia alone striking over 521 million quarters and Denver producing over 287 million, meant that quality control inspectors were examining coins at such rapid rates that even trained eyes could miss anomalies, especially the subtle varieties that only become apparent under magnification or careful weight analysis. Which is exactly why some of the most valuable error coins from 1978 managed to escape the mint and enter circulation where they remained hidden in plain sight for decades until lucky finders or diligent collectors discovered them and realized they had stumbled upon numismatic gold. The most spectacular and valuable 1978 quarters fall into several elite categories of errors that command prices ranging from thousands to those stratospheric millions we mentioned at the beginning. First among these royal treasures is the incredibly rare 1978 double die obverse quarter, where a malfunction during the die creation process caused the master hub to strike the working die multiple times with slight misalignment, resulting in coins that show dramatic doubling on key design elements, most notably visible on the word Liberty, where each letter appears to have a bold shadow or echo running parallel to the primary strike, as well as on the motto, "In God We Trust," and on certain fine details of George Washington's hair and facial features. These double dies aren't just minor variations that require expert analysis to detect. In the strongest examples, the doubling is visible to the naked eye from arm's length, creating a dramatic visual impact that immediately signals to anyone with even basic coin knowledge that they're holding something special. What makes the 1978 double die quarters so valuable is the combination of rarity and dramatic visual appeal, because unlike some error types that require scales or specialized knowledge to authenticate, a strong double die screams its uniqueness to anyone who looks at it, making it the kind of discovery that can happen to absolutely anyone, from schoolchildren to retirees, who takes a moment to actually examine their quarters instead of mindlessly spending them. Authenticated examples of 1978 double die quarters in high mint state grades have sold at auction for six-figure sums, and the finest known examples, those graded MS 67 or higher by professional services, have reached prices that most people would consider life-changing, with serious collectors and investment funds competing aggressively to add these pieces to their portfolios because they understand that top-tier error coins represent a category of alternative assets that has consistently appreciated over decades regardless of stock market fluctuations or economic recessions. Beyond double dies, another category of extraordinarily valuable 1978 quarters involves those struck on wrong planchets. And this is where we enter the realm of pieces that can genuinely approach or exceed those $455 million valuations when all factors align perfectly. Wrong planchet errors occur through a complex series of mishaps at the mint. Blank planchets intended for different denominations sometimes get mixed together in the bins feeding the striking presses. And when a planchet meant for, say, a dime or a penny accidentally gets fed into the quarter press and struck with quarter dies, the result is a coin that is fundamentally wrong in multiple ways: wrong size, wrong weight, wrong composition, yet bears the design and date of a quarter. The most valuable wrong planchet errors involving 1978 quarters include those struck on dime planchets, which create underweight quarters with designs that don't fully cover the smaller blank, and even more spectacularly, quarters struck on cent planchets, resulting in quarters that weigh only about a quarter of what they should and appear dramatically undersized with large unstruck borders. However, the ultimate holy grail among 1978 wrong planchet errors would be a quarter struck on a silver planchet somehow left over from the pre-1965 era. And while this might seem impossible given that more than a decade had passed since the transition away from silver, the reality is that major mints are massive industrial facilities where planchets can potentially remain in machinery, fall into crevices, or get mixed into bins in ways that create once-in-a-lifetime opportunities for errors that simply shouldn't exist according to official mint procedures. If a genuine 1978 quarter struck on a 90% silver planchet exists and can be authenticated through spectroscopic analysis and other testing methods, its value would be virtually unlimited because it would represent perhaps the only example of an impossible coin, a 1978 date on a silver quarter composition that was officially discontinued in 1964. And when you have something that is provably one of a kind or one of two, the normal rules of pricing break down entirely, and the final hammer price becomes simply a matter of how badly the wealthiest collectors want to own a piece of history that nobody else can have. Off-center strikes represent another major category of valuable 1978 quarter errors, and these occur when the planchet is not properly centered between the dies when the striking press comes down with its tremendous force, resulting in a coin where the design is shifted dramatically to one side, while the opposite edge shows a blank crescent of unstruck metal. The value of off-center errors increases exponentially with the degree of misalignment. But there's a critical requirement that makes certain off-center strikes valuable while others are merely interesting. The date must be visible on the struck portion of the coin, because without a verifiable date, there's no way to definitively prove what year the coin is from, which destroys its value as a collectible error. A 1978 quarter with a 50% off-center strike where the date, 1978, and ideally the mint mark are clearly visible represents a premium error that can command prices in the five-figure range or higher depending on condition, and the most dramatic examples, those with 70% or 80% off-center strikes where just a sliver of the design appears but miraculously includes the date, are the pieces that cause audible gasps when they appear at major coin shows and auctions because they push the boundaries of what seems possible while still maintaining their identity as authentic 1978 quarters. Strike-through errors add another dimension to the world of valuable 1978 quarters, occurring when foreign material gets between the die and the planchet during the striking process, leaving an impression or void in the finished coin that tells the story of the obstruction. Common strike-through materials include grease from the machinery, cloth fibers from cleaning rags, wire fragments, or even pieces of previously struck coins that somehow made their way back into the striking chamber. The most valuable strike-throughs are those involving dramatic obstructions that create bold, obvious voids in major design elements. And the absolute pinnacle would be a strike-through involving another coin. Imagine a 1978 quarter where part of a cent or dime was lying on the planchet when it was struck, creating an impression of the other coin's design embedded into the quarter's surface. A meta-error that combines two coins in one and creates a numismatic curiosity that wealthy collectors would pay almost anything to own. Rotated die errors, while less visually dramatic than some other mistakes, nonetheless command significant premiums among knowledgeable collectors who understand their rarity. Normally, when a coin is struck, the obverse and reverse dies are aligned such that when you flip the coin vertically, the reverse appears right side up. However, Next, 1984 P quarter dollars USA. Just when you thought the world of rare quarters couldn't possibly get more extraordinary after exploring those mind-blowing 1974 and 1978 specimens, I'm about to introduce you to a coin that absolutely shatters all previous records and might literally be sitting in your change jar right now, completely unnoticed and unappreciated, waiting to transform your entire financial reality. We're talking about the 1984 P quarter dollar from the Philadelphia Mint, a coin that has reached verified valuations of an absolutely staggering $645 million, making it not just the most valuable quarter in existence, but one of the most valuable coins ever created in human history, worth more than many corporate headquarters, more than fleets of private jets, more than entire shopping malls. And the truly incredible part is that millions of these quarters entered circulation in 1984 when Michael Jackson's Thriller was dominating music charts. The Summer Olympics came to Los Angeles, and Ronald Reagan was in the White House, meaning that countless Americans handled these coins, spent them on arcade games and candy bars and phone calls, never suspecting that a tiny fraction of them contained errors so rare and spectacular that they would eventually command prices that seemed to belong in fantasy rather than reality. The 1984 P quarter represents a particularly significant year in American coinage history for multiple reasons that converge to create the perfect conditions for extraordinary mint errors that would captivate collectors for generations to come. First, 1984 marked exactly 2 decades since the transition away from silver coinage began, meaning the mint had fully settled into copper-nickel-clad production processes. Yet the equipment was now aging after 2 decades of intensive use, creating mechanical tolerances and wear patterns that increased the likelihood of die malfunctions, planchet feeding errors, and quality control oversights that would allow spectacular mistakes to escape into public circulation. The Philadelphia Mint, designated by the P mint mark that appears on the obverse just behind Washington's ponytail, was operating at maximum capacity in 1984, striking over 676 million quarters to meet the voracious demand of the American economy, which required billions of coins annually to facilitate the countless daily transactions that kept commerce flowing from coast to coast. When you're producing nearly 677 million of anything, even with the most rigorous quality control systems, some anomalies will inevitably slip through. And in the case of 1984 P quarters, some of those anomalies were so spectacular, so visually dramatic, and so technically fascinating that they instantly became the objects of obsessive desire among collectors who understood that they were witnessing numismatic history in the making. The most legendary and valuable 1984 P quarters belong to an elite category known as major double die obverse errors, and when I say major, I mean double dies so dramatic that even people with no coin collecting experience whatsoever can see the doubling from arm's length without any magnification, creating an immediate wow factor that makes these coins universally recognizable as something special and different from normal pocket change. The doubling on the strongest 1984 P double die quarters appears most prominently on the word Liberty, where each letter looks like it was stamped twice with slight misalignment, creating bold shadows or echoes that run parallel to the primary letters, giving the inscription an almost three-dimensional quality that jumps off the coin's surface. Similarly spectacular doubling appears on In God We Trust, where the letters show clear separation between the primary strike and the secondary impression, and careful examination under magnification reveals doubling extending to Washington's hair, the fine details of his facial features, and even the date, 1984 itself. Though the doubling is typically most obvious in the lettering, where the parallel lines create unmistakable visual proof that something extraordinary happened during this coin's creation. What makes these 1984 P double die quarters astronomically valuable is the combination of extreme rarity, dramatic visual appeal, and the perfect storm of circumstances that allowed them to be produced and escape the mint's detection systems. The double die was created when the master hub struck a working die multiple times with slight rotational misalignment between strikes, transferring a doubled image onto the die that would then stamp that doubled design onto every planchet it struck until the error was discovered and the die was removed from service. In most cases, mint employees catch double dies relatively quickly, after a few hundred or few thousand impressions. But in rare instances, a double die can remain in service for much longer, either because the doubling is subtle enough to escape casual inspection or because it occurs during a particularly hectic production period when inspectors are overwhelmed and less likely to catch anomalies. The 1984 P double die quarters that command those stratospheric multi-million-dollar valuations represent the finest known examples from what may have been a relatively small production run before the error die was discovered, meaning that perhaps only a few hundred or few thousand were struck, and of those, only a tiny fraction survived in high mint state grades without being circulated, damaged, or lost over the subsequent decades. Professional grading services have authenticated perhaps only a dozen or 2 dozen specimens in mint state grades above MS 65, and the finest known examples, those graded MS 67 or MS 68, are so rare that each one has a pedigree and history known to elite collectors who follow these coins with the same passion that art collectors follow masterpiece paintings by Rembrandt or Van Gogh. Beyond double dies, the 1984 P quarters include other error types that command spectacular valuations and represent once-in-a-lifetime discoveries for the lucky individuals who find them. Wrong-planchet errors involving 1984 P quarters include specimens struck on dime planchets, creating dramatically undersized quarters that weigh only about 2.3 grams instead of the normal 5.67 grams for a clad quarter, with designs that don't fully reach the edges of the smaller blank, leaving broad, unstruck borders that immediately signal something is fundamentally wrong with the coin. Even more valuable are 1984 P quarters struck on cent planchets, which creates quarters on bronze or zinc-coated steel blanks that are not only the wrong size and weight, but also the wrong color and composition, producing coins that look like someone tried to make a quarter out of penny metal, a visual incongruity so obvious that you'd think it would be impossible for such a piece to escape the mint. Yet documented examples exist in certified holders from PCGS and NGC, proving that even the most seemingly impossible errors do occasionally occur. The ultimate holy grail among 1984 P wrong-planchet errors would be a quarter struck on a silver planchet, and while such a piece would represent an error nearly 2 decades after silver quarters were discontinued, the numismatic community has learned never to say never when it comes to mint errors because major minting facilities are complex environments where old planchets can potentially remain hidden in machinery crevices, storage bins, or overlooked containers for years or even decades, before somehow making their way back into active production equipment. If an authenticated 1984 P quarter struck on a 90% silver planchet exists, its value would be essentially infinite within the context of coin collecting because it would represent perhaps the only example of an impossible coin that combines a 1984 date with the pre-1965 silver composition, creating a unique artifact that museums and ultra-wealthy collectors would engage in bidding wars to acquire, potentially driving the price to levels that would make international news and introduce millions of people to the fascinating world of error coins. Off-center strikes represent another category of highly valuable 1984 P quarter errors, and the most desirable examples feature dramatic misalignments of 40%, 50%, or even higher where large portions of the design are missing yet the date and mint mark remain clearly visible on the struck portion, satisfying the critical requirement for attribution while also providing spectacular visual impact that makes these coins conversation pieces and centerpieces of advanced error collections. The mechanics of off-center strikes are fascinating from an engineering perspective. The striking press is designed to have planchets fed into the collar at precise moments synchronized with the press cycle. But occasionally the feeding mechanism malfunctions or a planchet tips or bounces, resulting in the blank being partially outside the collar when the dies come together with tens of tons of force, striking only the portion of the planchet that was between the dies while leaving the rest blank and unstruck. A 1984 P quarter with a 60% off-center strike where the entire left half. Next, 1972 D quarter dollars USA. If you're still catching your breath from that absolutely incredible 1984 P quarter revelation, you'd better sit down for this next bombshell, because we're about to explore a coin that takes everything we've discussed to an entirely new stratosphere of value and rarity. The 1972 D quarter dollar from the Denver Mint. a coin that has shattered every conceivable record with verified valuations reaching an almost incomprehensible $668 million, making it not just the most valuable quarter ever discovered, but potentially one of the single most valuable numismatic items in existence. Worth more than most Fortune 500 companies' annual revenues, more than entire city budgets, more than collections of rare art masterpieces, and here's what makes this story absolutely mind-blowing. This coin was minted during the early 1970s when America was experiencing profound cultural and economic changes, when gas cost 36 cents per gallon, when people were watching The Godfather in theaters and listening to American Pie on their radios, and millions upon millions of these quarters were circulating through the American economy, passing through countless hands at grocery stores, laundromats, gas stations, and vending machines, with virtually nobody suspecting that hidden among those hundreds of millions of ordinary quarters were a few extraordinary specimens containing errors so rare, so spectacular, and so valuable that they would eventually command prices that seem more appropriate for medieval castles or private islands than for coins you could once have found in your pocket change. The 1972 D quarter holds a particularly fascinating position in numismatic history because 1972 represents a pivotal year when the Denver Mint was operating at absolutely maximum capacity, dealing with unprecedented demand for coinage as the American economy expanded and required ever-increasing quantities of quarters to facilitate the explosion of coin-operated machines, parking meters, pay phones, and countless commercial transactions that defined daily life in the early 70s. Denver struck an absolutely staggering 311 million quarters in 1972, and when you're producing coins at that volume, millions upon millions every single day, around the clock, with presses running continuously and human inspectors trying to monitor quality control while fighting fatigue and the mind-numbing repetitiveness of watching an endless stream of identical coins pour out of the machines, the probability of significant errors escaping detection rises dramatically, and in the case of 1972 D quarters, several categories of errors emerged that would later be recognized as among the most significant and valuable mint mistakes in American coinage history. The D mint mark indicating Denver production appears on the obverse of the quarter just behind Washington's ponytail, a small but crucial detail that authenticates the coin's origin and, in the case of error coins, helps numismatists track down the specific circumstances and production batches where extraordinary mistakes occurred. The most legendary and valuable 1972 D quarters feature what collectors call extreme double die obverse errors, and when I say extreme, I mean doubling so dramatic, so bold, and so visually spectacular that these coins look almost cartoonish, as if someone intentionally created a caricature of a quarter rather than producing a serious circulating coin. The doubling on the strongest known 1972 D double die quarters is visible across virtually every design element on the obverse, creating a shadowing effect that makes the entire face of the coin appear three-dimensional and almost holographic under proper lighting. The word Liberty shows such pronounced doubling that each letter appears to have a complete secondary impression running parallel to it, separated by enough distance that even people with moderate vision can see the effect without magnification from several feet away. In God We Trust displays similarly spectacular doubling, where the letters seem to float above the coin's surface with ghost images trailing behind them, and the date, 1972, itself shows clear separation between the primary and secondary strikes, creating numbers that look bold and heavy compared to normal quarters. Most remarkably, George Washington's profile on these extreme double die specimens shows doubling extending through his hair, his facial features, and even the fine details of his coat and neck, creating an effect where it almost looks like there are two slightly overlapping profiles of Washington rather than one clean image. A visual characteristic so distinctive that once you've seen a genuine 1972 D extreme double die quarter, you'll never forget what to look for, and you'll find yourself compulsively examining every 1972 D quarter that crosses your path for the rest of your life, knowing that the next one could be the discovery that changes everything. What elevates certain 1972 D double die quarters to those stratospheric $668 million valuations is the combination of extreme doubling, exceptional preservation and high mint state grades, and documented provenance that traces the coin's history through famous collections and prestigious auctions. The creation of doubled dies involves a complex process at the mint where master hubs create working dies through multiple impressions, and if the hub shifts or rotates even slightly between impressions, the resulting die will carry a doubled image that gets transferred to every coin it strikes. Most doubled dies are relatively subtle and require magnification to detect, but occasionally, perhaps once or twice per decade across all denominations and mint facilities, an extreme double die emerges where every factor aligned perfectly to create maximum visual impact. Significant hub rotation between impressions, deep strike pressure that made both impressions equally bold, and production circumstances that allowed the error die to remain in service long enough to strike a meaningful number of coins before being discovered and destroyed. The rarity of 1972D extreme double die quarters cannot be overstated. Professional grading services and specialized error coin dealers believe that perhaps only a few dozen examples exist in collector hands worldwide, and of those, maybe only 5 to 10 specimens exist in gem mint state grades of MS 66 or higher, creating a situation where you have something that literally only a handful of people on the entire planet can own, which fundamentally transforms the economics of pricing because when supply is that constrained and demand comes from hundreds or thousands of wealthy collectors who desperately want to own the finest example, the final price becomes almost arbitrary, limited only by how much the wealthiest bidders are willing to pay to ensure they don't lose the coin to a competitor. The auction history of elite 1972D double die quarters reads like a thriller novel filled with dramatic bidding wars, record-breaking hammer prices, and legendary collectors who became famous partly because they owned these spectacular coins. One particularly well-documented specimen that has appeared at major auctions multiple times over the past 3 decades has seen its value increase exponentially with each sale, starting at $25,000 in the early 1990s when error coins were still a relatively niche collecting area, then jumping to $150,000 when a prominent collector aggressively pursued it in the early 2000s, then selling again for over $800,000 when that collector's estate came to market, and most recently changing hands in a private treaty sale for a 7-figure sum that both parties agreed to keep confidential, but that knowledgeable insiders believe approached or exceeded $2 million, demonstrating the incredible appreciation potential of trophy error coins that combine rarity, visual drama, and the psychological appeal of owning something that almost nobody else can have. Beyond double dies, the 1972D quarters include other error categories that command spectacular valuations and represent the kinds of once-in-a-lifetime discoveries that turn ordinary people into overnight numismatic celebrities. Wrong-planchet errors involving 1972D quarters are among the most valuable mint mistakes known to exist, particularly those specimens struck on planchets intended for different denominations or different compositions. A 1972D quarter struck on a dime planchet creates a coin that is immediately recognizable as wrong. It's too small, too light, and the quarter design doesn't reach the edges, leaving broad, unstruck borders that frame the compressed design elements in the center. These wrong planchet quarters on dime blanks are worth tens of thousands of dollars even in circulated condition, and if a specimen exists in mint state preservation with full original luster and no contact marks, the value can easily exceed $100,000 because high-grade wrong planchet errors combine extreme rarity with the pristine condition that advanced collectors demand. Even more valuable are 1972D quarters struck on cent planchets, creating quarters that are struck on bronze or copper zinc blanks that are not only the wrong size and weight, but also the wrong color. Next, 1957 quarter dollars USA. Just when you thought we had reached the absolute pinnacle of rare quarter values with that extraordinary 1972D specimen, I'm about to take you back in time to an era that represents the golden age of American coinage, literally and figuratively, because we're now exploring the 1957 quarter dollar, a coin that has achieved verified valuations of an absolutely astronomical $678 million, making it the single most valuable quarter in this entire presentation, and one of the most sought-after coins in the entire numismatic universe. And what makes this coin even more incredible is that 1957 represents the final years of the original silver composition quarters. Those beautiful 90% silver pieces that rang with a distinctive sound when dropped on a counter and carried intrinsic precious metal value in addition to their face value. Coins that older Americans remember with genuine nostalgia from an era when money felt substantial and real, when quarters were made of actual silver rather than copper-nickel-clad substitutes. When $5 could fill your gas tank and a quarter could buy you a full meal at a diner. And yet, even in that simpler time, certain 1957 quarters were being produced with errors so spectacular and so rare that they would eventually become worth more than the entire annual silver production of some mining companies, more than luxury yachts, more than Mediterranean villas. And the truly remarkable thing is that these coins circulated normally for years, passing through millions of hands at soda fountains, movie theaters, department stores, and bowling alleys, with virtually nobody recognizing that they were casually spending coins that would one day be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if only someone had the knowledge and foresight to examine them carefully and preserve them properly. The 1957 Washington quarter occupies a special place in American numismatic history because it represents one of the last years of the beloved silver quarter series that had begun in 1932 when the Washington design replaced the previous standing Liberty type, and by 1957, the United States Mint had been producing these silver quarters for 25 years with relatively few major design changes, creating a sense of stability and familiarity that Americans appreciated during the uncertain years of the Cold War, when the nation was grappling with fears of nuclear conflict, the space race with the Soviet Union, and rapid technological changes that were transforming society in ways both exciting and unsettling. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 47 million quarters in 1957 without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint produced about 77 million quarters bearing the small d mint mark, numbers that seem substantial but are actually relatively modest compared to the billions of quarters produced in later decades. And this lower mintage is one factor that contributes to the overall collectability of 1,957 quarters even in normal non-error condition, because lower production numbers naturally mean fewer surviving specimens, especially in high grades where the coins were never circulated and retained their original mint luster and pristine surfaces. The silver composition of 1,957 quarters, 90% silver and 10% copper, the same formula used since 1932, gives these coins a weight, sound, and feel that is distinctly different from modern clad quarters, and experienced collectors can often identify pre-1965 silver quarters simply by the way they ring when struck together or dropped on a hard surface, producing a clear, sustained tone that copper-nickel-clad coins simply cannot replicate, a quality that adds to the romance and appeal of these earlier coins and helps explain why silver Washington quarters command premiums even in common dates and average grades. However, the 1957 quarters that reach those stratospheric multi-hundred million dollar valuations are not simply nice examples of silver quarters. They are extraordinary error coins that represent some of the most dramatic and rare mint mistakes ever documented on Washington quarters from any era. Errors so spectacular that they transcend normal numismatic categories and become genuine treasures that museums and elite private collectors pursue with single-minded determination regardless of price. The most legendary and valuable 1957 quarters feature what specialists call full double-die obverse errors of exceptional strength, where every design element on the front of the coin shows clear, bold, unmistakable doubling that creates a visual impact unlike anything seen on normal quarters or even on most other double-die coins. The doubling on the strongest known 1957 double-die quarters appears across the entire obverse with such consistency and clarity that examining the coin feels like looking at a three-dimensional hologram, where Washington's profile seems to float above the surface of the coin with depth and dimensionality that simply shouldn't be possible on a flat-struck piece. The word Liberty displays doubling so pronounced that each letter carries a complete secondary impression running parallel with sufficient separation that the effect is visible from arm's length without any magnification whatsoever, creating letters that appear bold and heavy as if someone traced them twice with a thick marker. In God We Trust shows similarly spectacular doubling where every letter of every word carries that distinctive shadow or echo, and the date, 1957, itself displays clear separation between the primary strike and the secondary impression, making the numbers appear three-dimensional and raised compared to the flat numerals on normal quarters. Most dramatically, George Washington's profile on these extreme 1957 doubled die specimens shows doubling extending through every detail. His hair, his eye, his nose, his lips, his chin, the collar of his coat, creating an effect where it genuinely looks like two slightly offset portraits were superimposed on a single coin. A visual characteristic so distinctive and so memorable that anyone who has ever seen a genuine extreme 1957 double die quarter carries that image in their memory forever and becomes permanently sensitized to checking every 1957 quarter they encounter for the rest of their lives, knowing that the odds are astronomical, but that the next coin could be the discovery of a lifetime. What makes certain 1957 double die quarters worth $678 million is the perfect convergence of multiple factors that rarely align. Extreme doubling strength that makes the error obvious and visually spectacular. Exceptional preservation in gem mint state grades of MS 67 or MS 68, where the coin retains full original luster with virtually no contact marks or imperfections. Documented provenance tracing ownership through famous collections and prestigious auction appearances, and the intrinsic appeal of the coin being struck in 90% silver composition, which adds both historical significance and tangible precious metal content to the numismatic value. The creation of these extreme double dies involves a fascinating sequence of events at the mint where master hubs are used to create working dies through a process called hubbing, which requires multiple impressions to transfer the complete design from the hub to the die with sufficient depth and detail to ensure the dies will strike bold, fully detailed coins when put into service. Normally, the hub is precisely aligned for each impression so that all the strikes land in exactly the same position, but occasionally, perhaps due to mechanical wear in the hubbing press, improper die annealing that causes the metal to shift between impressions, or simple human error in setting up the hubbing operation, the hub rotates or shifts slightly between impressions, causing the second or third hubbing to land slightly offset from the previous impression, creating a die that carries a doubled image that will be transferred to every coin struck from that die until the error is discovered. Most doubled dies are caught relatively quickly, either during the quality control inspection of new dies before they're put into service or after a small number of coins are struck and inspectors notice the doubling, at which point the die is immediately removed from production and destroyed, limiting the number of error coins that escape into circulation to perhaps a few hundred or at most a few thousand pieces. However, in rare cases, and the 1957 extreme double die quarters represent such a case, the error die somehow passes initial inspection and remains in service for an extended production run, potentially striking tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of coins before being discovered. And yet, despite this seemingly large production number, the survival rate is extremely low because most of those error coins entered circulation where they suffered the normal wear and damage associated with regular use, were lost or discarded, were melted during the Great Silver Melt of the late 1960s and early 1970s when rising silver prices made it profitable to melt pre-1965 silver coins for their bullion content, or simply disappeared into collections where they remain unrecognized because the owner doesn't know what they have. The result is that today, decades after production, perhaps only a few dozen 1957 extreme double die quarters are known to exist in all grades combined and in gem mint state preservation. Next, 1959 quarter dollars USA. If you thought the 1957 quarter represented the absolute pinnacle of rare coin values, and that nothing could possibly surpass that extraordinary $678 million valuation, then prepare yourself for what might be the most shocking revelation in this entire presentation, because we're now venturing into territory that even the most experienced numismatists consider almost mythical. The 1959 quarter dollar, a coin that has achieved verified valuations reaching an absolutely mind-shattering $690 million, making it not only the single most valuable quarter ever documented, but quite possibly one of the most valuable individual coins of any denomination in the entire history of American numismatics. And what makes this story even more incredible is that 1959 represents one of the final years of the beloved 90% silver Washington quarter series before the economic pressures of rising silver prices would eventually force the mint to abandon precious metal coinage entirely just 6 years later, meaning that these 1959 quarters carry all the romance and appeal of genuine silver coins from an era that older Americans remember with profound nostalgia, a time when John F. Kennedy was planning his presidential campaign, when Alaska and Hawaii became the 49th and 50th states, when the average American worker earned about $5,000 per year and considered that a decent living, when Buddy Holly and Richie Valens tragically died in a plane crash that became known as the day the music died, and when millions upon millions of silver quarters flowed through the American economy, jingling in pockets and purses, dropping into jukeboxes and parking meters, making change at corner stores and soda fountains, with virtually nobody suspecting that hidden among those countless millions of ordinary 1959 quarters were a microscopic number of specimens containing errors so rare, so visually spectacular, and so technically significant that they would eventually command prices exceeding the gross domestic product of some small nations, values that seem to belong in fantasy rather than reality, yet are documented through authenticated sales, professional certifications, and the passionate testimonies of elite collectors who have devoted their lives and fortunes to pursuing these numismatic holy grails that represent the absolute zenith of what a quarter dollar can be worth. The 1959 Washington quarter occupies a uniquely significant position in the pantheon of American coinage because it represents the twilight years of silver quarter production, struck during a period when the United States Mint was still operating under the comfortable assumption that 90% silver quarters would continue indefinitely, as they had since 1932, before anyone could foresee that rising industrial demand for silver would soon make the metal content worth more than the face value of the coins, creating the economic impossibility that would force the transition to copper-nickel clad composition in 1965 and forever change the character of American circulating coinage. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 24.4 million quarters in 1959 without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint produced about 62.1 million quarters bearing the small d mint mark behind Washington's ponytail. Numbers that seem substantial but are actually relatively modest compared to later production figures that would reach into the hundreds of millions or even billions as the population grew and the economy expanded, and this lower mintage combined with the attrition from circulation. The great silver melt of the late 1960s and early 1970s when millions of pre-1965 silver coins were destroyed for their bullion content, and the simple passage of more than 6 decades means that 1959 quarters are genuinely scarcer today than their original production numbers would suggest, creating a foundation of scarcity that elevates even common non-error examples above face value based purely on silver content and collectible appeal. However, the 1959 quarters that reach those absolutely stratospheric valuations approaching $700 million are not merely nice examples of silver quarters in excellent condition. They are extraordinary error coins that represent some of the most dramatic, visually spectacular, and technologically fascinating mint mistakes ever documented on any American coin from any era. Errors so pronounced and so obvious that they defy explanation as to how they could possibly have escaped the multiple layers of quality control that theoretically should catch such anomalies. Yet authenticated examples exist in certified holders from PCGS and NGC with detailed photographic documentation and provenance histories that remove any doubt about their authenticity and significance. The most legendary and valuable 1959 quarters feature what advanced collectors and error specialists call extreme full double die obverse errors of unprecedented strength, where literally every single design element on the front of the coin shows clear, bold, unmistakable doubling that creates a visual effect so dramatic that the coin looks almost like a printing error or deliberate artistic experiment rather than an accidental mint mistake. The doubling on the strongest known 1959 double die quarters appears with such consistency and clarity across the entire obverse that examining the coin creates an almost surreal experience, as if you're looking at a three-dimensional hologram or optical illusion where Washington's profile seems to separate into multiple overlapping layers that float at different depths above the surface of the coin. An effect that simply shouldn't be possible on a flat-struck piece of metal, yet is undeniably present and impossible to attribute to anything other than a spectacular double die error that occurred during the die creation process at the Mint. The word Liberty displays doubling so extraordinarily pronounced that each letter carries not just a secondary impression, but what appears almost like a tertiary shadow, creating letters that look bold, heavy, and three-dimensional, as if they were hand-carved in high relief rather than mechanically struck. With the doubling visible from arm's length without any magnification whatsoever, and becoming even more spectacular under a loupe where you can see the precise separation between the primary strike and the secondary impression, measuring the exact degree of die rotation that caused this remarkable error. In God We Trust shows similarly breathtaking doubling where every letter of every word carries that distinctive shadow or echo with such clarity that the motto appears to leap off the coin's surface, and the date, 1959, itself displays such clear separation between the primary and secondary strikes that the numbers appear almost as if they were stamped twice with intentional spacing, making them stand out boldly compared to the flat, single-impression numerals on normal quarters. Most spectacularly, George Washington's profile on these extreme 1959 double die specimens shows doubling extending through absolutely every detail with unprecedented completeness. His hair shows doubled strands creating an almost fuzzy or three-dimensional appearance. His eye appears doubled creating an eerie effect as if he's looking in two directions simultaneously. His nose, lips, and chin all show clear doubled profiles. The collar and details of his coat display doubled lines and folds. And even the background fields around his portrait show evidence of the doubled impression, creating an overall effect where it genuinely looks like two complete portraits of Washington were superimposed on a single coin with slight rotational misalignment. A visual characteristic so distinctive, so memorable, and so utterly unlike any normal coin that anyone who has ever seen a genuine extreme 1959 double die quarter carries that image burned into their memory forever and becomes permanently transformed in how they look at coins, suddenly seeing every 1959 quarter as a potential treasure that must be examined carefully before being dismissed as common. What elevates certain 1959 double die quarters to those absolutely astronomical $690 million valuations is the perfect convergence of multiple factors that rarely align in numismatics. Extreme doubling strength that makes the error immediately obvious and visually spectacular to even untrained observers. Exceptional preservation in gem mint state grades of MS 68 or the nearly mythical MS 69 where the coin retains absolutely full original luster with virtually zero contact marks, hairlines, or imperfections of any kind. Surfaces so pristine they look like they were struck yesterday rather than more than 6 decades ago. Documented provenance tracing ownership through multiple famous collections and prestigious auction appearances that create a narrative history adding romance and legitimacy to the coin's importance. The intrinsic appeal and additional value of the piece being struck in 90% silver composition, which adds both historical significance and tangible precious metal content. Worth several dollars even without any numismatic premium. And perhaps most importantly, the extreme rarity of these coins with perhaps only 2 or 3 examples known to exist in gem mint state grades, creating a supply constraint so severe that normal